At 6 to 12 a.m., July 20th, 2025, off the coast of Somalia, the unthinkable happened. A U.S. Navy logistics vessel, LV-72 Delta, disguised as a rust-stained commercial freighter, was ambushed by a wolf pack of 31 pirate skiffs. Each boat tore across the waves at over 50 knots, fanned out like a swarm of guided missiles. Aboard them, over 240 hardened fighters armed with RPGs, 50 caliber machine guns, and bayonets duct taped to Kalashnikovs. This wasn't desperation, it was choreography. A coordinated, militarized assault. The ship's 10-man security crew returned fire from behind steel shipping containers. 2 pirates fell. 5 Americans didn't get back up. 3 others were critically wounded before they could reload. The bridge was overrun, the radar was silenced, and command control fell in under 4 minutes. The pirates tied survivors with tow cables, forced them to lie face down at gunpoint, and celebrated their prize, what they believed was another soft-target cargo ship. But what they had just seized wasn't ordinary freight. Hidden in its cargo hold, high-density jet fuel, thermal ignition systems, and encrypted avionics modules, the very heartbeat of a nearby U.S. carrier strike group operating in the Arabian Sea. Without LV-72, Delta, America's F-35s don't fly. Tomahawks don't fire. It was a floating artery in a global combat system. As the pirates fired into the air in victory, one man lay bleeding inside the comms bay. The ship's captain, a former Navy lieutenant. With seconds left and gun barrels drawing close, he reached beneath a bolted floor plate and activated a silent distress signal, a hardened encrypted beacon. A single ping aimed 128 miles away to the USS Liberty, the lead carrier of the strike group. He didn't know if it got through, but it did, and what followed was no rescue. It was retribution. At 06:15 a.m., 3 minutes after the last American sailor fell, a burst of digital code cracked across a secure military frequency. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but for Rear Admiral Peter Sloan, commanding officer of Carrier Strike Group 14, it was enough. The silent distress signal from LV-72 Delta hit the CIC Combat Information Center like a missile. Priority 1: hostile capture of a high-value naval asset. Not a skirmish, not a piracy case. A national security breach. Inside the Pentagon Situation Room, red indicators flared across screens. The NSA Navy Cyber Command and Fifth Fleet analysts reviewed the ship's cargo manifest in seconds. The list read like a nightmare. JP-9 high-density jet fuel, thermal ignition stabilizers, quantum-locked GPS avionics for cruise missiles. These weren't just materials. They were the blood and bone of a carrier group's offensive reach. If any of it reached hostile hands or worse was reverse-engineered, the repercussions would ripple across continents. Adversarial nations could clone thermal triggers. Terror groups could use fuel to construct DIY missiles. No option remained but one. Respond now. Rear Admiral Sloan didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the CIC command deck aboard the USS Liberty, looked his operations chief in the eye, and said, "Initiate ThunderNet. Full spectrum deployment. No diplomacy, no delay. This ends at sea." ThunderNet wasn't a recovery protocol. It was a war doctrine, an integrated multi-domain response forged for scenarios where failure means strategic collapse. Within 60 seconds, 3 strike orders were issued. Launch drones for recon and electronic warfare. Prep FA-18 Super Hornets for precision suppression. Mobilize 200 elite operators, SEALs, and Marine Raiders handpicked for maritime hostage recovery. At that moment, in a classified hangar below deck, 2 experimental Valkyrie XQ-58EA drones were armed with stealth recon pods and readied for airborne escort. Their mission: stay invisible, map the battlefield, and hunt. And overhead, a satellite locked onto LV-72's location, confirming what Sloan feared: the ship was drifting fast, just 10 nautical miles from the pirate coast. There would be no second chances. The world was watching, and the next move would belong to America. By 06:18 a.m., the order had reached every battle station across 3 U.S. Navy vessels. Operation ThunderNet is live. Immediate launch. No airspace restrictions. ROE active threat elimination. The response was seismic. On the flight deck of the USS Liberty, the ocean boiled beneath 10 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters, blades howling in the dawn wind. Inside each bird sat 30 elite Navy SEALs and Marine Raiders, outfitted for stealth assault and CQB close quarters battle. Faces stoic, minds locked in. They weren't going in to negotiate. Below Deck 5 FA-18 Super Hornets were loaded with GAU-7A miniguns and GBU-32J down precision bombs. Their targets weren't just the hijacked ship, but also pirate gun emplacements, coastal radar nests, and any boat foolish enough to flank. In Hangar C, engineers pushed the envelope. The XQ-58A Valkyrie drones, normally experimental escorts, were rerouted to fly under radio silence. Lightweight unmanned AI guided these drones would map the electronic terrain of the enemy without ever being seen. They would be America's eyes. Simultaneously, 20 MQ-25 Stingray drones were launched in triangular formation. Built for long-endurance reconnaissance and strike, each drone carried dual microbomb bays and thermal optics calibrated to spot even a twitch behind a steel door. And watching it all unfold from a shadowed bridge above Rear Admiral Sloan monitored the digital battlefield, a vast ocean of red arrows and blue trajectories. His fingers rested over the intercom. His voice broke the silence. Phase 1 green. Launch waves, all assets go. At 06:27 a.m., the sky over the northern Indian Ocean roared to life. The first wave UAVs darted ahead to scan the sea and pinpoint the hijacked ship. The second wave Super Hornets formed a wide circle, engines blazing ready to hammer shipboard threats. The third wave Seahawks glided just above wave height, low enough to stay invisible to pirate radar, but high enough to strike like a scalpel when the moment came. Overhead, a Hawkeye E-2D early warning aircraft kept constant vigil, ensuring total airspace domination and live enemy movement feeds to every American pilot in the sky. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a signal fire to every adversary watching from afar. At 07:01 a.m., the hijacked vessel LV-72 Delta drifted within visual range of the Somali coast. The shoreline shimmered in the heat, and behind it waited the pirates' safe haven, a hardened black market compound tangled in decades of smuggling routes and tribal allegiances. But the pirates never made it. From the east, flying silent and fast, came the first line of vengeance, MQ-25 Stingrays, streaking just meters above the ocean. Their payloads were already armed. 4 pirate skiffs flanking the captured ship were designated targets. In perfect synchronicity, the drones released microbombs guided by real-time heat signatures and motion vectors. In under 12 seconds, the sea erupted with fire and steel, 4 escort boats gone vaporized into boiling surf. From the upper sky, 2 FA-18 Super Hornets peeled into attack vectors. Miniguns roared, slicing across the ship's port side. Sandbag nests exploded. Gunmen dove too late. An RPG ignited in midair, detonated before the trigger even clicked. Then came the moment the pirates never expected, the ghost from the sea. 10 MH-60 Seahawks surged in low from the west, emerging from the radar shadow zone. Ropes dropped in a blur. SEALs and raiders rappelled down, boots slamming onto the deck, weapons ready, synchronized to heartbeat precision. The pirates were disoriented, their skiffs destroyed, their radios jammed, their firepower neutered by air superiority. From the stern to the bridge, the American strike teams moved like a machine. One team cleared the engine room using flashbangs and suppressed carbines. Another breached the command cabin, eliminating 2 pirates with double-tap shots before they could raise their rifles. A third secured the central hold, verifying the classified cargo was intact and rigged for recovery. No American was lost, not one hostage was left behind. And in the midst of it, slumped against a fuel valve, lay the captain, bloodied, breathing, and alive. His distress signal, his sacrifice, had bought just enough time. And now the ship was back in American hands. But Rear Admiral Sloan's eyes were already elsewhere. Because just 7 nautical miles inland, the beating heart of Somalia's pirate empire was pulsing. And it was next. The American hostages were found fast bound with rope, bruised but breathing. Navy medics triaged the wounded under the humming blades of hovering Seahawks. Within minutes, IVs were flowing, compresses were applied, and 6 sailors were stabilized for evac. But among them, one story stood out. Petty Officer First Class. Devin Cole, just 24, had shielded a fellow sailor during the firefight, taking a metal fragment to the leg while dragging her behind a steel crate. When the SEALs found him, he was half conscious, whispering the Lord's Prayer. He survived. She did too. His body would leave on a stretcher. His name would echo through every fleet. Above, drones confirmed the impossible. The classified fuel reserves were still sealed, ignition compounds untouched. No crate breached, no encryption cracked. LV-72 Delta had been moments from disappearing into the hands of modern pirates, an act that could have compromised the heart of America's global strike architecture. Because this ship wasn't just moving parts. It was a mobile fuel artery for an entire U.S. carrier strike group. And in the modern world of stealth fighters and AI-guided missiles, the supply lines matter more than ever. It was a reminder the Pentagon had quietly known for years. He who defends the fuel line controls the front line. Rear Admiral Sloan stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and looked out across the shimmering horizon. His men had just snatched a logistics vessel back from the jaws of collapse. But the mission wasn't over. Not yet. Because while LV-72 had been recovered, the pirates' fortress was still operational. Intelligence drones showed trucks scrambling in the dirt, fuel depots, signal jammers, reinforcements. If the raiders were allowed to vanish inland, this victory would ring hollow. America had sent a warning. Now it would deliver judgment. And with every second, the kill box was tightening. By 07:12 a.m., the target had been confirmed. 7 nautical miles inland, nestled between dry hills and brush-covered ravines, sat the largest pirate compound on the Somali coast. A black market hub that had survived years of UN resolutions, failed drone strikes, and corrupt ceasefires. No longer. Rear Admiral Sloan gave the order with the calm of a man pulling a trigger. Switch targets, neutralize the base, full throttle. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets, their bellies loaded with GBU-32 JDAM bombs, formed into a diamond formation at 18,000 feet. Their flight paths had been digitally plotted within a 5-foot margin of error, a hammer guided by silicon nerves. As they reached the coast, the lead pilot spoke just once. Fox 3, payload out. 12 bombs dropped, 11 found home. 1 wasn't needed. In less than a minute, the pirate headquarters disintegrated under a wave of laser-guided steel. The command center caved. The comms tower split in 2. Explosions rolled through fuel depots, weapons bunkers, and vehicle bays, lighting up the horizon like a sunrise from hell. But it wasn't over. Overhead, a Reaper drone in orbit, since the assault on the ship was fed thermal imaging from stingrays already tracking underground heat signatures. Within seconds, a Hellfire missile screamed from altitude and smashed directly into a concealed tunnel entrance, triggering a chain of secondary explosions, so violent they lifted debris half a mile inland. A plume of flame engulfed the radar site. Earthworks collapsed, command tunnels vaporized. For nearly a decade, that base had been a sanctuary, fortified by geography and shadow diplomacy, too politically risky for a full-blown strike. But today wasn't politics. Today was principle. And the message was clear. You hijack an American warship, and there is no rock deep enough to hide under. In the CIC aboard the USS Liberty, Sloan stood silent, watching the infrared feed from high orbit. 500 pirates dead, dozens more buried alive. No civilians reported, no escape possible. At 07:29 a.m., the compound that had once armed half the coast was a smoldering crater. But the cleanup wasn't over yet, because now the boots were coming in. 07:34 a.m., the dust hadn't even settled when 2 CH-53E Super Stallion helicopters thundered in over the scorched ruins, their rotors kicking up ash and splinters of shattered steel. Inside, Marine raiders armed with thermal scopes, suppressed M4s, and drone-linked HUDs. These weren't infantry, they were hunters dropped into a field already bleeding heat and confusion. Within minutes, the Marines were offloading, moving in wedge formation toward the remaining tunnel-mouse bunkers and collapsed fortifications. Overhead drone feeds piped real-time visuals into their goggles. If a heat signature twitched in the shadows, it was marked. If a weapon flashed, it was returned tenfold. No warnings, no calls for surrender. By 07:50 a.m., every corner had been cleared. Bodies lay where resistance had failed. Dozens of pirates too injured to flee were bound with zip ties and blindfolded loaded onto VTOL aircraft for intelligence extraction. Several high-ranking figures, once considered untouchable due to tribal or regional connections, were among the captured. The net had closed, and far beyond Somalia, the world took notice. The United Nations convened an emergency session with U.S. allies, praising the operation as a lawful act of strategic defense. The African Union, long frustrated by piracy in the Gulf of Aden, released a rare statement of full support. NATO issued a communique reaffirming that logistics vessels fall under Article 5 protections if attacked in Allied operations. But perhaps most notably, the People's Liberation Army Navy, observing from their own assets in the region, remained silent. Not a word, not a challenge, not a shadow on the horizon. For Rear Admiral Sloan, that was message enough. Because deterrence isn't declared, it's demonstrated. And this demonstration had been absolute. Back on LV-72, Delta technicians worked to re-secure the ship's encrypted avionics modules, while fuel lines were double-sealed. The ship would be tugged back under full escort, protected by air, sea, and satellite, until it returned to full operational status. What had started as a hijacking had become a full-spectrum case study in rapid force projection. And across command centers and boardrooms from Brussels to Tokyo, one fact became brutally clear. America may take a hit, but it never bleeds without answering. By 08:00 a.m., the battle was over, but the message was only beginning to echo. The supply ship LV-72 Delta had been secured. Its critical cargo jet fuel ignition systems and encrypted modules was untouched. All hostages had been rescued. The pirate compound, once a decades-old hub of black market trafficking, lay reduced to ash and silence. Over 500 pirates were confirmed killed. Not a single American sailor lost in the recapture. But beyond the operational victory lay something deeper. This was not just a military success. It was a declaration of resolve, a reminder that logistics is not vulnerability, it is power. In the 21st century battle space, the fight doesn't start with the first missile. It starts with the fuel truck, the data cable, the technician. America's enemies underestimated the importance of a supply ship. They won't make that mistake again. What happened on July 20th wasn't just about Somalia. It was about the global message of deterrence, that whether it's a stealth bomber over the Pacific or a disguised cargo ship in pirate waters, every link in the U.S. military chain is protected with overwhelming force. And that force doesn't hesitate. To every rogue actor watching on coasts and bunkers or behind state-sponsored terminals, this was the cost of testing American will. The flag that flies over our fleet is more than cloth. It's backed by readiness, precision, and a doctrine that never sleeps. So now we leave you with this. What if that distress signal had failed? What if those materials had disappeared into the shadows of the black market? How close did we come to catastrophe? If you believe stories like this need to be told, without filters, without apologies, then let your voice be part of it. Drop a comment, hit like, subscribe for the next chapter, because next time we dive beneath the surface, Silent Shield, how U.S. submarines are redrawing the maritime chessboard. Until then, remember, wherever the American flag sails, it is never alone.